All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors Talmud Torah sponsor for the month of Shvat, Mrs. Selma Wolf, for dedicating all the Shemar Joshos this month with immense gratitude for the refuahs from Hashem and the merit of refuah for all of those in need, and the schos of our brave soldiers, and the merit Hashem and the schos of the return of our hostages. To thank our week of learning sponsors, Ken and Dina Lieblich, in the merit of the safe return of their son, Aaron Daniel Ben Medina and his entire pluga from Gaza. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah they should have incredible hatzlacha b'chol ma'aseh yadehem, and the merit Hashem should return to their families b'shalom and b'karov. And of course we dedicate all of Maseches Bava Kamma le'ilui nishmas Master Sergeant Eliyahu Michal Charush Hashem Yikom Damo, in the merit of our Talmud Torah. May his neshama have an aliyah and his family in nechama. But so with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. Baruch Hashem, a lot to do today. Today's daf is daf Tzadik 90, and we are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Pei Testament base 89b with Amar Rava. Amar Rava, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, about 18, 19 lines up from the bottom, actually right across from Tosas Kigon. So the Gemara says as follows: Amar Rava, Rava explained, Seifa Ason Liksuvas Ben Indichas. So just a reminder again, we were actually dealing with a really interesting sugya about, remember, or I should say, we started with the Mishnah, and the Mishnah made a statement that there are certain people, the Mishnah said, Pigi Asan Ra. Pigi Asan Ra literally means your encounter with them is going to have negative consequences. So one of those people mentioned was a woman, a married woman. What's the issue with the married woman? So the Gemara says, here's the issue. If you injure her, you are completely liable, but she is not liable to pay, or at least she's not liable to pay during marriage. The assumption is she doesn't have assets, or at least she doesn't have liquid assets with which she could pay damages. So what we pretty much were dealing with yesterday was trying to figure out, why doesn't she have liquid assets? After all, she has a ksuva. And even though the ksuva itself cannot be paid during marriage, there's something called tovas ksuva, right? Or tovas hana, futures, the ability to go ahead and pay the future value of the ksuva. So the Gemara was we're not going to go through all of this again, obviously, but the Gemara was trying to figure out why exactly that would be an issue, most notably the concept of Rabbi Meir, the idea being that a man is not permitted to live with his wife without the ksuva. So the Gemara now says as follows: Omer Rava, Rava said, Seifa, the end of the Braysa, son ksuvas ben indichren, was talking about ksuvas and ben indichren. So we spoke about this yesterday, but I did a little bit rushed at the end of this year. If we take a look at Rashi, ksuvas ben indichren, Rashi says over here, beparak nara shin is pesa. So remember again in Maseches Ksuvas, the Gemara discusses benin dichrin. So we'll say this was an actual phrase in the ksuva, and the phrase would go like this. Right? If it's in the ksuva, let's say Rachel is married to Ruvain, so in the ksuva it would say like this: any male sons that I have from you, Inon Yahavin Yarsin Kesef Ksuva Seich Yeser Al Chulkein Deim Al Chulhun. They will inherit my ksuva in addition to any other portions that they will inherit from your estate. So essentially, we've spoken about this many times before. So ksuvas ben indichrin essentially is the clause that says sons inherit their mother's ksuva independent of any other inheritance considerations. So essentially, the ksuva of the mother is taken out of the inheritance pot, given to the male sons of that particular woman, and now halacha l'maisa, after that the estate is divided up. So the Gemara says as follows: V'hachi katani, this is what it means to V'hachi katani. Kishem shamochares ksuvas lacherin lo efsida ksuvas ben indichren. The same way that if a woman goes ahead and sells her ksuva to someone else, i.e., she sells the future, right? Future right of her ksuva, that ultimately, again, ksuvas ben indichren, that clause, that phrase, right, ultimately is not compromised. It still applies. The Gemara says, my time, what's the reason? Zuzi huda ansuha. Because Rose said she does not mean to forgive that phrase. Rather, again, she just needs some more immediate cash. So because she needs more immediate cash, that's why she's selling the future right to her ksuva. So the Gemara says, so too kach mocheres ksuva salabayla. So too if a woman sells the future right of her ksuva to her husband, Lo hefsida ksuvas belim dichrin. She has not given up on ksuvas belim dichrin. Why is that? My taima zuzi huda ansuha. It's only because she's in desperate need of cash. So the desperation, the need of money right now is causing her to go ahead and sell the future right of the ksuva. But Allah l'maisa in no way means that she is forgiving any of the associated halachas with ksuva. All right, very interesting. So the Gemara says, let's kind of zone out a little bit here. Lema takanas ushatanai. So I'll say, so remember again, how did we get into all of this? Remember how we got into all of this? We got into all of this with the interesting case of the mother of Rav Shmuel, who married Rabbi Abba, and during the course of her marriage, she gave her property over to her son. She then went ahead and died. So the shaila now was, Rav Shmuel and Rabbi Abba both asked, was that a proper transaction or not? So we'll say, what's that play over here? What's that play over here is takanas usha. What was the takana of usha? What was takanas usha? So takanas usha was that if a woman sells any of her nichsei malug over the course of her marriage, then what could happen? When she dies, her husband has the right to seize those assets from any purchasers. That's takanas usha. So the Gemara says maybe takanas usha, the whole essence of takanas usha, is in machlokes tanoim. In other words, is there such a takana or not? The Gemara says the tani chada, because we'll say, for example, one brayso says as the tani chada, avdi malug yotzin b'shein ba'ayin leisha avalo b'ish. So we'll say this is actually a fascinating discussion. So watch this. We'll say, let's say a woman brings into the marriage avodim. Right, she brings in an Eved Kinani. Now we know the halacha is that by an Eved Kinani, if you knock out one of the 24 parts of the body, right, one of the 24 limbs, so to speak, then halacha l'maisa the Eved goes free. Now remember again, what's unique about Nichsei Malog, right? So a woman brings an Eved into marriage. Who owns the Eved? Who owns the Eved? Right? Right? So remember again, this is kind of a little bit on machlokes. On one hand, we would say the woman owns it, right? So she owns title. What does the husband have? Peros, use. So remember again, we have another outstanding overarching machlokes which we have not resolved, which is, do we say machlokes Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish, kinyan peros ke kinyan aguf, or lav ke kinyan aguf? Is usage tantamount to ownership or not? So that's still hovering around. We're going to Meretz Hashem see the Shulchan Aruch today. We're going to have time for it. So that's still supposed to see. Now here's the interesting part. So I play this out. Woman goes ahead and brings nichsei malug into her marriage, an eved. Okay. So now we'll say, let's say husband or wife, one of them ends up knocking out the eye of the eved. Does the eved go free as a result of that injury? Now watch how riveting this is. So one brayso says, so the Gemara says, Yotzi b'shem ayin li'isha v'lo li'ish. One brayso says, if the woman knocks out the eye, ultimately the eved goes free. But if the husband does it, the eved doesn't go free. That's one brayso. The other brayso says, Lo ish v'lo isha. No, the eved doesn't go free regardless. Whether the man knocks it out or the woman knocks it out, ultimately again, eved doesn't go free. So we'll say, so now watch this. What's that play over here? What's the machlokes? Here we go. So let's presuppose that everyone agrees that usage is not tantamount to ownership. Kinyan peros is not kinyan haguf. Therefore, again, my love b'hakam. You're supposed to, what are they arguing about? The mandar of the isha. So the first price that says that if the woman knocks out the eye of the eved goes free. Lesle takanas usha. They don't subscribe to takanas usha. I both say, now what does it mean if you don't subscribe to takanas usha? What does that mean? That means that what? That the woman is the complete owner of any nichsei malug she brings in. V'haraya, if she sells it, what's halach if she sells her nichsei malug? It's sold. It's sold. Husband has no recourse on that, which shows that she is the complete owner of nichsei malug. If she's the complete owner of nichsei malug, and she goes out and she knocks out the eye of her eved, then what? The eved goes free. So it must be at the first price. So now the Gemara, so again, just understand what's happening over here. The way the Gemara is setting this up, we are presupposing that everyone agrees kinyan peros lav ke kinyan aguf. Usage is not tantamount to ownership. So what's the machlokes over here? The machlokes is there takanas usha? So the first brisa that says that if the woman knocks out the eye of her eved, which is nechsei malug, the eved goes free. Only the woman, not the husband. That brisa holds no takana susha. Woman is the complete owner of her nechsei malug, and therefore, if she injures her eved, ultimately eved goes free. So the Gemara says, on the other hand, the man damar lo liish v'lo liisha is le takanas usha. On the other hand, the second brisa that says that whether it's the husband or the wife who knocks out the eye of the eved doesn't go free. That brisa subscribes to takanas usha, because I will say essentially, if you subscribe to takanas usha, who is the owner of the property? Who's the owner of the property? Well, it's kind of neither of them to a certain degree. In other words, on one hand, wife is not complete owner. Why? Because halacha l'maisa, husband will have the right to seize it from purchasers after her death. And husband is not really complete owner because he doesn't really have the right to sell it. So neither of them is really the complete owner. If neither of them is the complete owner, then halacha l'maisa, if either of them, right? If neither of them is the complete owner, then if either of them knock out the eye of the eved will not go free. So that's how the Gemara is setting this up. To which the Gemara says, lo, I don't like that explanation, scrap it. Rather, the kuli alma is takana susha. The Gemara says, no. Everyone agrees with takana susha. Let's remember again, let's just get our terms down. What's takana susha? Takana susha says, takana that says that if a woman sells off nechsei malug over the course of her marriage, and she then predeceases her husband has the right to seize that property from any purchasers. That's takana susha. So the Gemara says, and we'll say again, what's the point of that takana? The point of that takana is to hopefully ease to ease some level of marital tension, right? A husband has the obligation to support his wife. That right is offset, right, by his ability to use her property. If she starts selling off property and he is deprived of that right of usage, so that could be problematic. So kind of takanas usha restores equilibrium a little bit by saying, don't worry, if she sells it, if she predeceases you could take back whatever it is that she sold. So the Gemara suggests everyone agrees with takana susha. Everyone agrees with it. So what's that play over here? Ela kan called them takana. Kan la'achar takana. Very interesting. Very interesting. The two brises are talking about chronologically two different times. The brisa that says that ultimately if the woman knocks out the eye of her eved that's nechsei malug, the eved goes free. But if the man doesn't, it's not. That ultimately is before takana susha, and therefore the woman is really the sole owner of her nechsei malug. Versus the second brisa that says neither the man nor the woman. That's after takana susha. Beautiful. The other possibility is, listen to this. So we'll say, so rather the third possibility is both prices are after takana susha was instituted, and not only that, everyone agrees about takana susha. So what's the machlokas? So watch this. So what's according to the opinion that says that if the woman knocks out the eye, the eved goes free, but not the man? What's the logic there? My taima kidarava. So Rabbi said this is very interesting. So ultimately, again, he holds like Rava. Now, what does Rava say? So we've seen this actually a number of times. Damar Rava, top of tzaddik. Damar Rava, hekdish chametz b'shikrar mafkin midei shibud. So Rabbi said it's actually interesting. There are certain things which ultimately remove a lien from property. Certain things which, even if there's a lien against property, these things remove. So we'll say, let's just talk about this outside for just a moment, right? You have, let's say, an animal, right? Reuven lent Shimon money, right? So Shimon owes Reuven money. So now let's say again, Shimon goes ahead and says, I have a cow, I'm going to repay you from this cow. What do we call it? Let's call it a sheep, actually. Right? A sheep, I'm going to repay you from the sheep. Right? And he designates that sheep as a form of repayment. So what do we call it in halacha? That's called an apotiki. Apotiki, right? Apotehei kai. That means when you designate a particular item as a source of repayment. So we'll say, so now what happens? What happens now? Shimon goes ahead and says that same sheep, he says that's going to be a carbon. So we'll say, now what's the halacha when he makes it a carbon? The act of being makdish the animal removes the apotiki status from the animal. Right? The act of being makdish something ultimately removes the lien, the financial lien against it. Similar idea, chametz will say. What happens? Same case. Reuben lends Shimon money. Shimon owes Reuben money. What does Shimon do? Shimon goes ahead and pledges his, very expensive bottle of scotch. Right? That's worth $2,000 to go ahead. Then what happens? I'll say Pesach comes. Scotch is asr on Pesach, chametz. So chametz, the status of chametz, ultimately removes the lien. And lastly, shichrur. We'll say, if let's say again, shichrur would be a case that halacha l'maisa again. Reuben lent Shimon money. Shimon pledged to pay back Reuben. He appointed his eved. Ultimately, as the apotheke, he's going to pay back. And now what happens? So now Shimon emancipates the eved. If Shimon emancipates the eved, emancipation removes the lien. So essentially what Rava says is like this. There are three things, we'll say, that remove a lien from property. Number one is hekdish. Number two is chametz, and number three is shichrur. So again, those three things remove liens. Now, why is this important for us over here? Because watch this. The Gemara is suggesting the following halacha, namely, you have nichsei mulug. So we'll say, what happens with nichsei mulug? Nichsei mulug is owned by the woman, but essentially is encumbered by the husband, right? Especially after takanas usha. Because after takanas usha, what that says is, wife, rachel, whatever you do with that property over the course of the marriage, if you die, or when you die, ultimately your husband has the right to seize it back from any of the people you sold it to. So the property is owned, right, is owned by the woman, but encumbered by the husband. So now what did the Brisa say? The Brisa said that if the woman, Rachel, knocks out the eye of the Eved, first Brisa at least, ultimately, again, the Eved goes free. Now, why is that? We'll say, what's the logic there? The Gemara wants to suggest it's like Rava. Because by knocking out the eye, what happens to the Eved? We'll say, by knocking out the eye, what's the halacha? If you knock out your Eved's eye, Eved goes free. That's shichrur. Shichrur is one of those three things that ultimately goes ahead and lifts a lien, removes a lien. So therefore, if a woman knocks out the eye of her eved that's nichsei mulog, the eved is emancipated, and thereby removes any type of claim that the husband has on the property. It's incredible. So the Gemara says, Leima de Rava Tanaihi. So we'll say, maybe it's this very point of Rava that ultimately is the machlokes Tanaim. To which the Gemara says, "Lo, not really. The chuli alma islu de Rava." Everyone agrees with Rava's principle that ultimately, and I will say, there are these three things. There are these three things that ultimately, again, remove a pre-existing lien. V'hacha amuha rabbanan l'shibuda debal. So Rabbi said, this is actually very interesting. What's interesting over here is everyone agrees in halacha l'maisa. Everyone agrees with Rava's principle. So what's going on over here? So I'll say what's interesting over here is it could be that Chazal made the husband's claim so strong that it even supersedes Rava. In other words, that maybe halacha l'maisa, takanas usha is so strong that it even usurps or it even eclipses the statement of Rava. That's the second brisa. That's why the second brisa says that even if a woman knocks out the eye of her eved, the eved doesn't go free. Why is that? That was Chazal's way of saying we're cementing the husband's claim to this nichsei mulug even stronger than Rava's idea. Okay, so I'll say, so remember again, we're just trying to figure out now how to go ahead and reconcile these two brises, right? Brisa number one says that if a woman knocks out the eye of her eved, that's nichsei mulog, the eved goes free. Brisa number two says whether the woman does it or the husband does it, the eved doesn't go free. So we're just trying to reconcile this. So we'll say it is just a beautiful idea if you think about it in Rava's statement about these three things that go ahead and remove the lien. So we'll say if you think about the first one, hekdish. So just think about this in just a moment, right? In a simple case, Reuben lent Shimon money. Shimon designated a sheep as a form of repayment, which means now that animal is encumbered. The animal is encumbered. What we call an apoteki. Shimon now decides to say this sheep is going to be a shlomin. What happens the moment that Shimon does that? What happens? Any pre-existing liens are lifted or removed. So there's a beautiful yesod in this, the power of making something hegdish, the power of dedicating something to a higher level of kedusha. That singular dedication by itself, even though nothing has actually happened, fundamentally changes the status of the item. So the sheep was collateralized, and then the act of Shimon saying this sheep is now hagdish removes it from any collateralization and makes it into something holier. But it's the same sheep. Nothing happened. Just the mere act of being makdish something fundamentally changes it. And I will say, if it works with the sheep, alachas Kamma v'Kamma, the power that this has regarding our status as well. I will say, sometimes in life, I'm in a place that I don't want to be in. I'm in a situation that I don't want to be in. In other words, just emotionally, spiritually, I'm not holding where I want to be. Sometimes the mere act of making myself hektish, of saying, you know what, I hereby pledge myself to a higher level of Kedusha. I hereby pledge myself to being a better person, to being a different person, to living a different kind of life, to holding myself to a different set of expectations. The mere act of doing that, even though I haven't actually done anything differently, fundamentally changes me and removes so many of the shackles that I often feel attached to over the course of life. The act of pledging yourself to something bigger and greater than what you currently are has the cathartic ability to change you, even though actually nothing has actually occurred. Such a tremendous yisod. If it works ultimately, again, for the apoteki sheep, then pledging ourselves to be something greater, to live something higher, to accomplish something more, fundamentally changes us as well. Such an incredible yisod. I will say another possibility. Tzadik Kavand Aleph 9da, 4 lines down. The other possibility is the Kuli Alma Isluhani Tanoi Takana Susha. So now we're going to go full circle. Everyone agrees with Takana Susha. Right? I will say there is a Takana like this. That's not in dispute. So we'll say what's the machlok? So here we go. Bekinyan Peres Kinyan Aguftami. So we'll say, so now we come back to the Sodistic Machlokes, Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Kinyan Peres Kinyan Aguf, Alapir Kinyan Aguf. Is usage tantamount to ownership or not? Ubeplukta tahani tanoi. And I will say, really, this machlokes in the brises is this machlokes tanoi. Here we go. Disanya hamocher abdul acher upasak imo ameashish mishenu shloshim yom. So now watch this. Fascinating case. Ruvain has an eved. He sells his eved to Shimon. Good, so far so good. But there's an interesting caveat in the sale where Reuven says, I'm selling my eved to Shimon. Shimon, here's the deal. I'm selling him to you now, but he's going to work for me, Reuven, the next 30 days. Rose, see what's happening over here? So the sale, this happens on a Wednesday. The sale is valid as of Wednesday. But essentially, again, is a little bit of like a rent back. Now, Reuven's not paying anything per se, but Lamai saying, I'm selling him to you now, but he's going to continue to work for me for the next 30 days. So what's that? So we'll say, so now watch this. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Meir Omer. So we'll say, so now the case over here is, I will say, is that there's a din of Yom or Yomayim. Let's talk about this just a moment. An interesting din by an Eved. We'll say, let's talk about this in the abstract for just a second. In a general case, right, Reuven goes ahead and Reuven injures Shimon. Shimon dies as a result of those injuries. So what's halacha? Reuven has capital liability, right? Reuven is put to death, assuming there's eidos and everything else. Let's say Reuven injures Shimon, but Shimon doesn't die from those injuries for another year. What's the halacha? Reuven is still responsible. In other words, we'll say it doesn't matter whether death is immediate or death occurs sometimes later on. If we know with absolute certainty that Shimon dies as a result of the injuries inflicted upon him by Reuven, then Reuven is liable. It is a different halacha when it comes to Eved Kanani. When it comes to Eved Kanani, if the master injures the Eved Kanani and the Eved dies within 24 hours, master is liable. If the Eved dies outside of the window of 24 hours, master is not liable. That's the din of what we call Yom or Yomayim, a day versus 2 days. So we'll say, so now watch this. Reuven sold his eved to Shimon. But now what happens? But he stipulated that the eved is going to work for me for the next 30 days. So we'll say, so now what happens? Now in these cases, someone is injuring and the eved dies. and the Eved dies. So we'll say, but let's say, so now watch this. So Rabbi Meir Omer, Rishon yeshno bedin yom o yomayim, mipnei shu tachtov. So Rabbi will say, who is subject to the din of yom or yomayim? Rabbi Meir says, it's Ruvain. It's Ruvain, right? Ruvain, who's utilizing the Eved for the next 30 days, is subject to the halachas of yom or yomayim. Why? Kasavar kinyan peros ke kinyan aguftami. Because Rabbi Meir holds that Rabbi say usage is tantamount to ownership. Therefore, since Reuven is utilizing the Eved for the next 30 days, even though who has title? Shimon has title. Even though Shimon has title since Reuven is using him, so kinyan peros ke kinyan aguf. Therefore, Reuven is subject to the halachas of yom or yomayim. So again, Rabbi say what that means is if Reuven injures the Eved and the Eved dies as a result of injuries within 24 hours, Reuven is liable. Right? Outside of 24 hours, Reuven's not liable. Rabbi Yehuda says, so Sheni yeshno b'din yom yomayim. So Rabbi Yehuda says, no, not true. It's not Reuven who is subject to the din of yom yomayim. Rather, what? Ultimately, again, it is Shimon. Right? Shimon, the titular owner. So the Gemara says, why? Meshu kaspo. Ultimately, again, because the Eved belongs to Shimon. What do you see from here? Kasavar kinyan peros lavke kinyan aguftami. Because Rabbi Yehuda holds that usage is not tantamount to ownership. So Rabbi says, so this is really quite fascinating over here. So the Gemara is just suggesting that well, let's finish up. Rabbi Yossi says, Shnehem yeshno bedin yom o yomai. Rabbi Yossi says, both Ruvain and Shimon are subject to the halacha of yom or yomayim. Why? Zemip meishu tachtov. So Ruvain, because he has usage, the zemip meishu kaspo. Ultimately, again, in Shimon, because he owns it. So according to Rabbi Yossi, misap kalei kinyan peros ika kinyan aguftami ilatke kinyan aguftami v'safek nefashos lahakel. So Rabbi says, so ultimately, again, Rabbi Yossi is mesupach. Rabbi Yossi is not sure. Do we say kinyan peros kinyan aguftami? Is usage like ownership or not? And Rabbi say he's not sure, and because he's not sure, ultimately, again, we go misafek. Right there from Misafik, we give them both kinds of the benefit of the doubt over here. Rabbi Eliezer says, Shnehem einon b'din yom yomayim. Neither is subject to the halach of yom yomayim. I will say, by the way, when we say you're not subject to the law of yom yomayim, what does that mean? What that means is that halacha l'maisa, if the Eved dies of his injuries, even outside of the 24-hour window, you're going to be chayiv. Remember again, this is a unique halacha by the owner of the Eved. So zelefi she'eno tachtov, this one, because ultimately the Eved is not actively serving him. There refers to Shimon. V'zelefi she'eno kaspo, and Ruvain is exempt. Why? Because he doesn't own it. Amar Rav says, my time is Rabbi Eliezer. What's Rabbi Eliezer's logic? Amar kra ki kaspohu kaspo hamiyuchad lo. Ultimately, I'm going to say that, remember, the Torah, when speaking about the din of Yom HaYomayim, discusses why is this halacha intact? Why ki kaspohu? Ultimately, because the Eved is the kesef, is the monetary possession of the owner. Well, here's the problem. In this case, Rabbi Eliezer will say, neither party, Reuven nor Shimon, could claim that the Eved is his monetary possession. Why not? Because neither of them has complete ownership, so to speak, or complete kesef ownership over the Eved. Reuven, because ultimately, again, he doesn't own title. Shimon, because he's not currently able to use the Eved. So we'll say, let's pause here for just a second. This is really a quite interesting machlokas. The Gemara is just suggesting, remember, let's go back for just a second. What are we focused on? We're focused on the reconciliation of two brises, right? Brise number one that says that ultimately, again, if a woman blinds the eye of her Eved, as Nichsei Mulug, the Eved goes free. But if the husband does it, the Eved doesn't go free. Brise number two, either husband or wife who blind the Eved doesn't go free. So right now we're trying to reconcile that. So the Gemara is suggesting, it's very simple, very simple. What's the machlokas between the brises? Our classic machlokas, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Do we say kinyan peros ke kinyan aguf or lav ke kinyan aguf? Ultimately, again, so if halacha l'maisa, first brisa will say yes, second brisa will say no. That's the fundamental machlokes. The Gemara is just pointing out over here, just framing this machlokes over here in the case of Yom or Yomayim. Fine. So Kiman Azla Hada Amar Amemar. So we'll say whose opinion is reflected in the following statement of Amemar. What did Amemar say? Ishvi Isha Shemachru B'nichsei Malog. If a man or a woman sell nichsei malog, lo asa v'lo klum. Right? We'll say so they haven't done anything. They haven't done anything. Lo asav lo klum. So Kiman, whose opinion is reflected over here in this Kiman? Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi say reflects the view of Rabbi Eliezer. So the Gemara says, Man tanaluhu. So again, Man tanaluhu de tan Rabbana. So who ultimately is reflected in the following halacha? Mi shechatziv eved v'chatziv ben chorin. If someone is a chatziv eved chatziv ben chorin. But remember again, how do you become half eved, half ben chorin? Classic case, partners, right? Two partners own an eved. One emancipates his chilek, one does not. So that's a chatzi eved, chatzi ben chorin. V'chein eved shal shnei shlutzfin, or ultimately again an eved that belongs to two partners. Ein yotzin barashe ivarim she'enon chozrin. Such an eved, I will say, if he loses one of the body parts, ultimately again he is not emancipated. So I will say, whose opinion is this? Earlier of Mordechai Rav Ashi, Rabbi Eliezer. This is a statement of Rabbi Eliezer, right? Because I will say again, Rabbi Eliezer was the one who held that by Yoma Yomayim, so neither person is subject to the halacha of Yoma Yomayim. Why? Because Yoma Yomayim only applies ki kaspohu, if someone could claim complete ownership. But if you can't claim complete ownership, then ultimately again there is no ownership. So the Gemara says, Milo Amar Rabbi Eliezer kaspa miyuchalo. Does Rabbi Eliezer hold that kaspa means someone has to have complete ownership? Hachanami avdo hamiyuchalo. So too over here, when it comes to the type of injuries that emancipate an eved, that only works if one of the people ultimately again could claim complete ownership of the eved. But since in this case over here, no one has complete ownership, therefore halacha l'maisa, the eved does not go free. So I'll say, but just this idea of Rabbi Eliezer about kasbo hamiyuchalo is a very interesting idea. You know, the Gemara has a statement. So Rabbi Eliezer's whole shita with this is that the halachos, whether it's of emancipation or whether ultimately again it's Yoma Yomayim, only apply when someone could claim singular ownership. But if someone can't claim singular ownership, then halacha l'maisa, the eved effectively is considered to be, like halachically, unowned. You know, say it's reminiscent. The Gemara is a beautiful Gemara. The Gemara says, "Keder de beshutfi lo kariri v'lo chamimi." That ultimately will say, if you have a pot owned by two partners, it's never hot and it's never cold. It's never hot and it's never cold, right? We'll say, what's the pshat? That ultimately, again, when two people own something, so both assume that the other one is taking care of it. The other one is taking care of it. So therefore, the Gemara says, it never gets hot and never gets cold. Kind of everyone puts in minimal effort because they assume that the other one ultimately, again, is taking care of business. So I would say, tremendous Moshe Haskell in general, that in life, if you want something to get done, you have to take achrayus. You have to take responsibility. That all too often what happens in life, and you see this all the time, especially in communal types of situations, right? Where there's groups and there's this, and it kind of, everyone's like, okay, who's doing this? Who's doing that? Who's taking ownership of this? And what ends up happening? That's why so many things, wonderful things that happen on a communal level often stall out, right? Why? Because everybody's looking to someone else to take leadership on it. Whereas that's not the way things get done. The way things get done is a person says, it's on me. It's on me. I'm taking the achrayus. It doesn't mean that other people can't help. But lamaisa, in every single initiative, if you want something to get done, someone has to say, I am the man. I am the owner. I take responsibility for this. To move this, or responsibility sits on my shoulders. Everyone else can play a support role. But I am the bal achrayus. If you don't have that, you don't accomplish anything. Whether in your own life, if you're always looking for other people to do stuff for you so that you could accomplish, you're never going to get anywhere. You get involved in communal stuff, tzarchei tzibur. If you're looking for everyone else to pull their weight, simply not going to happen. If you want things to get done in life, make the buck stop with you. You take the achrayus, you take the responsibility, and with that responsibility comes the ability to move things forward to completion. That's really what Rabbi Eliezer is saying. When you have this eved that's owned by two people, who owns him? Who owns him, we'll say. And Rabbi Eliezer will say what? Really? See, we look at it, who owns him? Two people own him. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, in reality, you know who owns him? No one owns him. No one owns him, right? Why? Because at the end of the day, if the buck doesn't stop with someone in particular, that's an unowned circumstance. A tremendous yisod, I will say, in our own personal accomplishment, in tzarchei tzibur, if you want something to get done, own it and move it to completion. Incredible. But we'll say, just halacha l'maaseh before we move on, say, how do we paskin? How do we paskin? Because I will say, what we begin to see is this kinyan peros, kinyan aguf, alav kinyan aguf it's a major issue. So also listen to this. I'm actually going to quote to you today from the Shulchan Aruch, Choshen Mishpat, Siman Reish Nun Zayin Sif Hey. Now, interestingly enough, the way the Shulchan Aruch chooses to go ahead and illustrate this halacha actually is not in the case of, not really in the case we've seen in the Gemara, but a different kind of case. Machar habein b'chaye ha'av u'meis. Also, remember we had this case? This wasn't the dominant case we were dealing with, but it was a case that came up. Let's remember again. Ultimately, again, the son takes property. This was the case we had before, right? Yaakov, remember Yaakov has a son Reuven. What does Yaakov do? Yaakov gives his son property. He says, "This is your property. Mehayom im masi." From today, when I die. So essentially, what is he doing on a transactional level? He's giving the property over to his son as of today. But ultimately, again, so what's really happening over here is he's transferring title, but retaining usage. Right? So father is transferring title to his son, but retaining usage. Yaakov, father, is retaining usage until he dies. When he dies, then everything becomes the son. So what happens? Reuven gets a little trigger happy, right? Reuven's now got his first taste of real estate ownership, right? So what does Reuven do? Reuven's transacting, selling. Now he's a macher, right? And so what does he do? He sells the property. He sells the property while Yaakov, his father, is still alive. So what's halacha? Machra bein b'chaye ha'av. So now remember, if halacha l'maisa, he sold the property, and now Yaakov dies. So after Yaakov dies, what's the halacha? Well, actually, let's go. Umeis habein. But let's say, in the Shulchan Aruch's case, Reuven, the son, predeceases his father. The achar kach meis ha'av, and then the father dies. Kishayamos ha'av, kana halokeach, she'im la'av ela peros, v'kinyan peros eino kekinyan aguf. So this is actually interesting. So when Reuven dies, Reuven predeceases the father, right? Ultimately, again, afterwards, when Yaakov dies, the purchaser gets the property. Which I will say is another way of saying that Reuven's sale was a good sale, but remember, it's just a delayed transaction. So Reuven has the ability to go ahead and sell the property during the lifetime of his father, recognizing that the sale is not really going to go into effect until when? Until Yaakov dies. I will say, but the fact that Reuven could transact that sale, what does that tell you? Kinyan Peiros, ultimately, again, lav kekinyan aguf. Right? At the end of the day, that ultimately usage is not tantamount to ownership. So we'll say, so what, meaning what? That halacha l'maisa, Reuven has title, right? Yaakov has peros. Yaakov's peros are not like ownership. So we'll say, so that's the halacha. So the way we paskin again, Shulchan Aruch paskins, kinyan peros, lav kekinyan haguf. Usage is not ownership. And I will say, ownership is ownership. Title is ownership. Usage is not. So therefore, both say it's incredible. So therefore, in this case, where Yaakov says to his son Reuven, "This is your property from today. Mehayom im masi." Reuven becomes the owner. Yaakov, the father, still has peros. But if Reuven wants to transact with that land, he absolutely has the ability to do so. Incredible. We'll say that is the halacha l'maisa. Beautiful. Mishnah. Hatokeh lechavero. Suppose another interesting case. Tokeh lechavero. Rashi gives two girsos over what tokeh lechavero means. Tokeh lechavero either means that Reuven goes over to Shimon and hits him in the ear, just punches him in the ear, or literally again yells in his ear. Now, since you will say the common denominator in this is there may not be any kind of visible nezek in this, but I will say the topic of our Mishnah ultimately is boshes. is boshes, humiliation. So Reuben goes over to Shimon, punches him, and he yells in his ear, no sein lo sela. He gives him a sela. And I will say, we're going to see about why the Mishnah brings down these amounts. But the point over here is there's a payment for boshes for humiliation. But also the act of yelling in someone's ear, even if it doesn't cause damage, ultimately is embarrassing. Rabbi Yehuda said, not a sela, but a mana. Sitro, if you slap someone, no sin lo masayim zuz. You give them 200 zuz. I would say this is a boshes payment, right? Slapping someone is considered to be humiliation, and therefore there's a payment, right? Watch this. The achar yado will say if you give someone a backhanded slap. So apparently it's actually interesting in the world of slapping, right? There's a chilik between a front-handed slap and a backhanded slap, right? Both require boshes, but apparently like a backhanded slap is considered to be even more humiliating to the slappee. Right, is that the Vanasari word, right? Slapper and the slappy, right? So apparently getting a backhanded slap is considered to be even more humiliating. So, right, la'achar yado, no sin lo arba meo zuz, 400 zuz. Incredible. Saram ba'azno talash besaro, if you yank someone's ear, or you pull someone's hair, rakak v'giya barako, or you spit on someone and the saliva hits the person, right? Havir talisa menu, you pull off a person's cloak, para rosh ha'isha b'shuk, you uncover a woman's hair in the marketplace. So I will say these are all examples of you've humiliated someone. So what's the halacha? No sein lo arba meos zuz. You have to pay 400 zuz. Now I will say, now what's interesting is we learned before, we said the Gemara says, zaklal, this is the rule, on the base, hakol lefi kvodo. Now I will say boshes is a subjective payment. Now, of course, what's interesting about the Mishnah is what? The Mishnah is giving you objective payments, and I was talking about, by the way, boshes is subjective. Okay, so we'll see how to reconcile this. So Rabbi Akiva says, Afilu anim shebi Yisrael, roin osam kiluhem b'nei chorin shiardu minechsein, shehem b'nei Avram Yitzchak v'Yaakov. So we'll say such a beautiful, beautiful Gemara. We saw this before as well. Rabbi Akiva says, right? So Rabbi Akiva says something amazing. Rabbi Akiva says, I will say, after the Gemara just gets finished saying that boshes is a subjective payment, what you would say is like this. If you have a poor person, so his boshes, right? Or I should say differently. You have a rich person, his boshes is going to be X. So bepashtos, an ani, a pauper, his boshes is going to be what? X minus Y, because he's a pauper. Rabbi Akiva says that's not true. Every Yid, every Jew is treated like royalty. Treated like royalty, or essentially, it's literally, every Jew, even an ani, is treated like a person, ultimately, again, who was wealthy, but then perhaps lost his wealth. See, we'll see exactly what Rabbi Akiva is coming to be Mosif. Rabbi Akiva seems to be saying that when it comes to boshes, we look at every person as if they are on a high social status. Why? Ultimately, because we are the children of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. We'll say beautiful Gemara. We'll do a beautiful idea. We'll delve into that a little bit more. And we'll say this is a fascinating story. Here we go. Get ready for this. There was, I will say, once of a guy, we'll call him Ruvain, who went over to Rachel and pulled off her sheitel in the marketplace, humiliated her in the marketplace. And what happened? Basla lifnei Rabbi Akiva. The case came before Rabbi Akiva. V'chaybo litein la arba meos zuz. And Rabbi Akiva obligated Ruvain to pay Rachel 400 zuz. That's the payment for humiliation. That will say, so Amarlo. So Ruvain said, okay, Rabbi, tein li zman. So listen, 400 is a lot of money. Give me time and I'll come back with the payment. Okay, so now watch what happened. So Rabbi Akiva said, okay, you have time, whatever it was. You have a month. You have a month to come back and to go ahead and pay the money. Now watch this. Shamra omedes al pesach chatzera. So now Reuven had an interesting plan. Reuven one day sees Rachel standing on the outside of her house. And what did Reuven do? Reuven brought a jug of oil, a small jug of oil. He pretended like he dropped the jug in front of her. So Rabbi says, now the jug broke and the oil spilled out. So we'll say uba ki iser shemen, and there was a relatively small amount of oil inside of the jug. So we'll say, what did Rachel do? Rachel, right? Gilsa es Rosha. So Rachel was wearing like a tichel. So she went ahead and she took off her head covering. Now we'll say, why did she take off her head covering? Now remember, when oil spills, it's actually good to know. When oil spills, there's a way to chaparayin. How can you chaparayin on it? Take off the tichel, right? Take off an article of clothing, dunk it in the oil. It'll absorb the oil. Now what could you do? You could then bring that soaked item back and squeeze it out, and now you have the oil. So what did Rachel do? She took off her tichel. She put it in the oil. To soak up the oil. So what did she do? So to speak, she kept her hand on her head, so to speak, covering her hair with her hand, and used the tichel to soak up the oil. So ha'emid ala edim. So what happened? Ruvain. Now obviously this was pre-calculated, right? So Ruvain went ahead and had witnesses there. Obalaf me Rabbi Akiva, and he came up for Rabbi Akiva. Now what was Ruvain's point? Ruvain's point was like this. This is a woman who was willing to uncover her own hair for the sake of soaking up oil. Which means that what? That the boshes that she experienced when I uncovered her hair is not so great. You want to find me 400 zuz for the boshes, but this is not a woman who had 400 zuz of humiliation. Look, she's willing to uncover her own hair, right? She's willing to take off her tichel in order to go ahead and soak up the oil. So why would I be chayiv boshes for 400 zuz? Rabbi Akiva's answer is absolutely amazing. So Amrlei, lezu ani nosim dalad me'ozuz. So Reuven says to Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi, for this type of woman, I should have to pay $400. Rabbi say, Reuven's not saying you shouldn't pay something. I got it. I embarrassed her in the marketplace, but here is a woman who's willing to, so to speak, embarrass herself, right? She's willing to go ahead and pull off her tichel, right, and go ahead and soak up the oil. So for this woman, I should pay 400 zuz. So Rabbi Akiva's answer is amazing. So he says, Amar lo amrit klum. So Rabbi Akiva says, your claim is not a valid claim. I'll give you an example. Hachovel ba'atzmo apapi shen rashay pater achirim shechaval bo achayavim. Give you a simple example. I'll say, if I choose to break my own arm, so ultimately not good, right? You shouldn't do it, but I'm not liable to myself anything, right? In other words, if I injure myself, ultimately again I have no liability. I'm not allowed to do it, right? I shouldn't do it, but if I did it, there's no liability. Yet, if someone else comes along and breaks my arm, they are liable. I'll say similarly, if I have saplings, and I wantonly destroy them, unnecessarily destroy them. So I'll say, so I am liable for Baal Tashchis, but of course I don't owe myself anything. But if someone else goes ahead and destroys my property, ultimately again, we'll say, what does that show? What that shows is the following, that although there are certain things that I'm not allowed to do to myself, if I do them to myself, there's no liability. But just because I could do certain things to myself, I could take certain liberties with myself, does not mean other people can take those liberties with me. So whereas you may be correct, Rabbi Akiva was saying to Reuven, you may be right, that this may be a woman who is willing to quote-unquote humiliate herself, that doesn't give you the right to go ahead and humiliate her. I will say, it's actually a very profound yisod. You know, sometimes I will say, there are people who make what's the word, self-depreciating comments about themselves, right? Or take liberties with themselves, and that's not, it's nice. It's nice not to take yourself so seriously. That is nice. I will say, just because someone doesn't take themselves so seriously, doesn't give a right to anyone else not to take them seriously. Well, it's a very important thing. This happens all the time, where we assume because someone is so easygoing with themselves, right? They'll make, what is it? Is this self-depreciating comments? Self-deprecating comments, right? Self-deprecating comments. So you figure, whatever, I could chime in. No, you can't. No, you can't. Person can make self-deprecating comments, that's their business, for whatever the reason they do that. I want to say, you can never take liberties with another person's covet, even if they take liberties with their own covet. When it comes to how we interact with the other, we always have to maintain the highest level of respect to one another. Incredible. Gemara, let's go. Ibaylahu. So we'll say, so now the Gemara says, when we speak about that for Boshes, the Gemara says you have to go ahead and pay a mana, right? Rabbi Huda said, Rabbi Yossi, you have to pay a mana, right? You yell in someone's ear or hit someone in the ear, you have to pay them a mana. The Gemara just asks a simple question: you buy the mana tsuri tanan or mana medina tanan? But say what type of mana? There's two types of mana. So we'll say something called a mana tsuri, which is a more valuable mana, or a mana medina. Which one do you have to pay? So Tashma do Gavra the Takale Chavre. There was a guy who yelled in his friend's ear. Aslak made Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. He came over Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. Amrle Ha'ana Ha Rabbi Yossi Glili. Rabbi Yehuda said, both I and Rabbi Yosef really are standing here. We saw what you just did. Hav lai manatsuri. Pay the guy a manatsuri. Shabbos say, what do you see from here? You see that the man in question is a manatsuri. Shmamina, manatsuri tana shmamina. Shabbos I see from here that you have to pay a manatsuri. Incredible. So my ha'ana ha Rabbi Yosef Lili. Shabbos just by the way, what is this case over here? Rabbi Yehuda says, so again, the case over here seems to be, Rabbi Yehuda sees a guy yelling, right? Sees Reuven yelling in Shimon's ear. And Rabbi Yehuda says, both I and Rabbi Yossi are here. Go ahead and pay the guy a manatsuri. So what does that mean? Both I and Rabbi Yossi are here. Maybe he was saying the following. So I saw you yell in the guy's ear. And also Rabbi Yossi Glili holds that you have to give a manatsuri. Zil havle manatsuri. Then go ahead and give the guy a manatsuri. And what would that say? Lememra de'ed na'aseh dayon. So what that would seem to say is that what? That a witness could transition into being a judge. So what Rabbi Yehuda is saying is like this: I just saw what you did. So I was an aide, and now ultimately again I'm transforming into a dayan, into a judge, to make you liable, a manatsuri, in accordance with the position ultimately of Rabbi Yehuda, of Rabbi Yossi, I'm sorry. So is that true? Rabbi said that an aid could become a dayan. Vatani we learned, this is an interesting case. Sanhedrin, Shero, Echad, Sharaga, Sanefesh. So we'll say if a Sanhedrin, we'll say, watch this. Let's say Reuven killed Shimon, and Reuven killed Shimon in front of the Sanhedrin. Poor planning. Very poor planning, right? Right? Reuven killed Shimon mamish in front of the Sanhedrin. So Rabbi say, what do you do in a case like this? Miksasa na'asu edim u'miksasa na'asu dayan to Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon says it's not a problem. What we do is we kind of splice the group. And we say part of the group operates as witnesses, and the other part of the group operates as judges. Rabbi Kiva says no. Kulam edim hein. Rabbi Kiva says no. Since they all witnessed it, they are all what? They are all edim. They're all eidim. Ve'ein eid na'aseh dayan. And ultimately, again, I will say, a witness cannot transform into a judge. So the Gemara says, so ad kan lo kam Rabbi Tarfon el d'mitzasa nasu eidim mitzasa nasu dayanim. So Rabbi Tarfon holds, will say that when you have a group, you can make part of the group witnesses, part of the group dayanim. Aval aid na'aseh dayan lo kamar. But ultimately, the Gemara say he holds that an aid cannot become a dayan. If that's the case, then in this case, when Rabbi Yehuda is seeing the guy, right, Reuven hit Shimon on the ear, so Rabbi Yehuda witnessed it. How does Rabbi Yehuda then become a dayan? To which the Gemara says, no. Kitanya here say, what's that case? That case, I'm like, you're going shera'u balayla. Both say the case is where the Sanhedrin ultimately again saw this event when? At night. They saw it at night. They both say at night you can't adjudicate cases at night. So then halacha l'maisa, in that kind of case where you saw it at night, Rashi says, "Oshra balayla ulamacharas kishebain ladun ein danin ela al pishmua lefichach tzarich lemitzas lahide." The main sham elegim also says halacha l'maisa could very well be that that's a case ultimately where they saw it at night. So because they saw it at night, therefore halacha l'maisa, there's no ability for any of them to become dayan. I will say, we'll stop over here for tonight. We're going to pick up tomorrow, we'll say, with this fascinating sugya of eid na'aseh dayan. Does a witness, someone who witnessed something, could that person ultimately transform into a judge afterwards or not? And that's to be continued. Shkoyach. All right, Chavra Zoom, have a great day, everyone.